Welcome to The State of Us. Real people with honest opinions and the future of responsible media. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Democracy may no longer be the only path to prosperity. For many years, the nations with the most wealth and with the highest per GDP capitas were democracies. Now the tables might be set to turn. Who cares? Who cares? We live in a democracy. All is well with the world. Well, here's why you might care. An analysis by the Monetary Fund shows that sometime in the next 5 years, the total GDP of countries rated, quote, not free, end quote, by Freedom House will surpass that of Western democracies. The combined economies of democratic countries like the U.S., Germany, France, and Japan will be smaller than those of autocracies like China, Russia, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. If the West is to navigate this new world successfully, it will need to understand how the scales tip so rapidly from democratic dominance to authoritarian resurgence. So you care because you live in a democracy, and if things don't change, democracies will no longer be controlling as a whole, the world's wealth, or the majority of the world's wealth, put it that way.
Very interesting point being made here.
So with that, of course, we can't begin without the aforementioned...
Your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
I don't know if I like being called aforementioned.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. It is interesting, though, right? Lance did find this article for us. It's in the Sunday edition of the Wall Street Journal for March 2nd and 3rd.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got a chart, so he knew it was a winner. Here's the deal.
That always piques Justin T's interest, but it's an interesting article because it talks about we start to question like, well, everybody was a democracy because they love freedom, and the point of the article by these two scholars, I'm not sure that you've stated who they were, but the two scholars that wrote this basically made the argument that after World War II, the reason democracies were so popular is because they were the richest forms of government after World War II. Not because everybody liked to be free, but because everybody liked to live a better life.
You've got two political scientists who wrote this, one from the University of Melbourne and one who is an associate professor at Johns Hopkins.
And that's what really caught my attention was the fact that they were making, it wasn't about freedom that caused the idea of freedom that made everybody turn to democracy, but it was the fact that democracies were the wealthiest countries after World War II that made other countries look for democracy. And now that tide is changing, that the autocratic governments of the world are the wealthiest countries of the world. Their people are living better than we are on a day-to-day basis when it comes to housing, food, medical attention, all of those kinds of things, because now we're talking about, I think their breaking point was what, $20,000 or something like that was.
Yeah. As recently as 1995, 96% of all people who lived in a country with a per capita income over 20,000 were citizens of a liberal democracy, with the exception of a few oligarchs perched atop stagnant and repressive societies. However, today's reality...
But that's changing.
Right. So we go back to 1950, Lance, a little before 1950, and just approximately the percentage of global gross domestic product as purchasing power parity. So for Western democracies, their percentage of GDP on the world scale was about 60%. And then, of course, for autocracies, they were about 25%.
Okay.
Now today, though, so fast forward 2017, and it's about 35% for Western democracies and about 33%
for autocracies.
And the projection by like 2021, 2022 is that's where the split occurs and we switch places.
Right.
If everything keeps going the way it is.
If the norm continues.
Yes.
If changes aren't made. But the point is, the gap has narrowed to the point that it's almost equal. That countries run by autocratic regimes, their people are basically per capita as well off as the United States. And what I find interesting is they also talk about what these autocratic governments have done to bring all this money into their country. And it's not what you would think, probably for most folks.
Right. But even a more important factor has been the rise of authoritarian capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Before the 21st century, autocratic regimes that reached a relatively high level of per capita income tended either to stop growing, like the Soviet Union did, or to become democratic, like military regimes in Asia, Latin America, and Southern Europe. Countries such as Singapore, which kept growing without becoming a true democracy, were explained away as small exceptions that proved the rule. This limitation still applies to autocratic regimes like North Korea and Venezuela, which have clung to strict state control of the economy. But a growing number of countries have learned to combine autocratic rule with market-friendly institutions, and they have continued growing economically well beyond the point at which democratic transitions used to occur. Hence, China.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I remember when I was teaching, and I began to talk about in China how they had opened up zones of capitalism, that in order to keep the lid on their people, in order to allow the government to continue to control their lives and tell them how many children they could have and how big of a living space they could have, that they had opened up areas of China, usually around major cities or port cities, where people could practice capitalism. And so now all of a sudden, that's what's led. I mean, that was the start of what's led to China's growth as a world player in the market, is that they are now, even though they're a communist country and they are still very strict with people's personal freedoms, they've allowed people to make a lot of money.
Right.
It's not everything in China is controlled by the government. They've given their people economic independence to make money. And so the whole question is, are people, to me, what I find interesting is, are people willing to give up personal freedoms to live a better life? And if that's the case, then countries like the United States are in trouble. And see, I really think we're going down that road right now. You and I have been talking off air for the last week or so about the fact of with these new ID cards, driver's license that are coming out that are basically being mandated so that the government has better control over who we are and where we are. And they're saying you have to have these if you want to fly on domestic flights, because we all know you have to have a passport to fly on international flights. But now to fly domestically, you're going to have to give the government even more information than you've done in the past. And as you pointed out to me as I was ranting and raving, well, nobody says you have the right to fly. That's not in the Constitution, but again,
just like you don't have the right to drive either.
We're giving up freedom. It's like, well, I want to be safe, so you can search me at the airport. There are certain items I can't bring, that I can't travel with.
Obviously, most Americans are okay with that trade-off. But the question is, where's the line? Right?
I've never been. Just total transparency. I've been against it since, the 9/11 attacks and ranted and railed against it in my classes, and anybody who will listen, that I think that's an invasion of privacy. And people say, well, then you might die. Yes, I might, because I want to be free before I want to have the government intrude in my life even more. But again, most Americans are like, I've talked to people like, oh yeah, it wasn't that big a deal. I just had to get a couple pieces of ID. And yeah, I'm like, do you realize the government's going to be able to follow you even more? That they're going to be able to see what you're doing and know your locations and look into your life and your income and everything else? Well, yeah, but I'm safer and it doesn't bother me that much. So, even as Americans, even though we're living in one of the democracies that are losing economic power, right? We are giving
I did air quotes there.
We are giving up freedoms to be able to make more money. I'm not there, folks. Okay. And I've got some, and you're not listening to the antics of a person who doesn't have any money. I'm ranked, I don't know how, but as an upper middle class person with I don't know how I've done that as a public school teacher. I guess because I don't buy anything and I don't go anywhere and I don't spend very much money. I'm a tightwad. But man, going to give up freedoms, people. I have a hard time with that.
So, and that's like Lance was pointing out.
For economic independence.
The point of the article is, I guess it's really to get us to ask this question, which Lance and I are trying to examine, of where is the line where we're okay with government intervention to blank extent as long as we have a good life,
right?
And part of what Americans obviously have become increasingly concerned with in the past 30 years is national safety. And I mean that not just in safety from terrorist attacks, but safety from just outsiders in general. Mm-hmm. Even if you're not somebody who thinks we should build a wall on the southern border, that doesn't mean that you're not concerned about the continual influx that we have been conditioned to have a backlash against of foreign entities and individuals, right, coming into the country. We have even though we've done the show that says most crimes committed by people who were born here and have lived here their whole life. Right. A higher percentage of violent crime is committed by those. But the point being that we have those concerns, whether it's on a physical safety level, a job safety level, a happiness safety level, whatever that may be. So how much freedom are we willing to sacrifice in exchange for that? And that, I think, also begs the question, how important is our right to vote, which to me would be right. Our fundamental is to have a say in the way we're governed is our number one defining right, because all of our other rights are based on that idea, right? They're all governed by our ability to have a say. I guess we're voting for governments to take our rights away. That's what we're doing. Yes. We're choosing to vote for governments here in the United States who continue to chip away at our personal freedom in exchange for feeling safe to live a happy life, which I guess, obviously I'm outnumbered. People are saying, well, and part of it, just to go back, I've always said money's not the precursor to happiness, and we're only on this earth for a finite amount of time. So you need to do something with your life that makes you happy. And I was one of those lucky ones. I did. My job fulfilled my need for happiness. And it also allowed me to live the kind of life that I enjoyed and was able to do things for my family, and still do things for my family. So I don't have any regrets. So I understand the happiness piece, but boy, I don't want to give up freedoms. I just don't. I think we're going down a slippery slope, or as you like to say, the rabbit hole. Yeah. As we continue to allow our government to chip away at our rights in the name of safety and protection. So one of the things we wanted to look at in thinking about, how valuable is it to the American people? This, as we've established, the number one fundamental right is the right to have a say in how we're governed. Yes. Our right to vote. So we looked at, what's voter turnout look like as a percentage of the voting age population? Okay, so what does that mean? We're talking about people who are a United States citizen who are over the age of 18 years old. Okay. Now there are some misnomers in there, like people who have been incarcerated who can't vote. Generally speaking, it's a very marginal fraction. So it's not taken into account in this percentage, but it probably would not affect the whole percentage number. It'd be a decimal change is my point here. It's not big enough for it to be a huge determining point. So, what does it look like? Historically, how have we been voting? Well, there's not records readily available for 1828, just so everybody knows. So we don't know necessarily. You mean 1928, correct? No, 1828.
Okay.
So Lance and I are referencing a chart. You don't have this sheet.
Oh, I only got part of the information,
You only
folks.
got part of it.
That's what he does to the redneck liberal.
Wait.
Tries to make me look bad, but just give me part of the information.
But in 1828, okay, 57.6% was the turnout of the voting age population. So not great. However, we saw a peak, as may not be terribly surprising, in 1860. And again in 1876, where we got above 81%. That's our highest ever. Again, based on recorded history, because we don't know for sure. My guess is there were probably times it was close to that high before then, but we don't know. So these are the ones that we know about. 1860 and 1876 are the two times where we were above 80%. Now, more recently in modern history, let's look at 1932, 52.6% voter turnout. We'll fast forward to 1960, 62.8% voter turnout. So that's, and then again here, 1988, 50.3% voter turnouts. 2004, 55.7%. So generally speaking, for the bulk of history, we've hovered somewhere just a little over half of our voting age population has voted, with the exception of a few misnomers. In 2016, for example, 137.5 million Americans voted, which was 61.4% of the voting age population. So actually, interestingly enough, in 2008 and 2016, those 2 years, the 2008 number, Lance, that you have in front of you is not the updated one. Okay. So that one's not up to date. The Census Bureau just updated the 2016 numbers and tells us 61.4%. And for 2008, they told us 63.6%. So it was a little higher for Obama's initial election. And then it was just a little lower in the 2016 election. But those last couple of elections.
So basically since 1932, in the last 22 elections, presidential elections, we've only had 60% voter turnout or higher, with the highest being Obama was 63.
Yes.
28% of those elections. 72% of the time since 1932, in the last 22 presidential elections, if my quick math is correct here, we have been in the 50s. Never, and only once were we in the 40s.
Right.
So in 1996, it was 49%. Everything else, only 6 times have we been out of the 50 percentile range in the last 22 elections.
And since 1904, we've never gone above 66%. So it's been over 100 years, Lance, since we've seen over 65% voter turnout. Been quite a long time. So I guess the point there is that I don't want to say that the other portion doesn't care at all. But again, I think, right, one of the easiest ways to measure this is how many people really care. Well, we've got 320 million people in this country, approximately. And in the last election, 137.5 million voted. So,
but you've only got probably 240 to 250 million that are old enough to vote.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, obviously it's not fair to say the kids don't count.
Right.
Or it's not fair to say that they don't care. You can't use the
320 million because the people under the age of 18 aren't eligible to vote.
So of those that can, you've got 137 million. Mm-hmm. So, roughly 60% of the country,
which everybody went gaga about.
Yes.
Because, wow, look how we broke the record. That's the highest number of people that have ever voted. And it's,
right, in modern history.
And since 1932, it is, there's only one. Higher than that?
Yep. Just one.
61.6? No, right. 62.8.
So
there's only 2 that are higher than that.
Yeah.
So it's tied for the 3rd highest.
I was kind of surprised, especially around Vietnam. I would have thought, that would have been a time where you would have had.
Well, it was. 1960 was 62.8.
Right.
64 was 61.4.
So you were in the 60s.
68 was 60.7.
Yeah. So it was better than
and it was
normal.
also, but now I will throw in a historical caveat there. The voting age at that time was 21.
So it's more impressive.
So we take out all those people who don't vote now who are under the age of 22.
So less impressive.
Right, because we know that people between 18 and 24 today are the least likely group to vote, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't have that, during the Vietnam time, it was 21 years old to be able to vote. But to your point, you would have thought, well, yeah, dude, it was 60, 64, and 68. It was all in the 60s. I mean, that decade of the 60s were 3 of the 6 times, or half the times that the voting percentage was in the 60s.
I imagine it might have been higher though, historically speaking, because so many of the people that you had who were being sent to die were 18, Well, that 19 or 20.
That was one of the biggest arguments to give them the right to vote.
Right. Exactly.
What was to give them the right to vote was the fact,
My point is that might have been even higher, or it probably would have been in the same area that time, because my guess is those people would have probably wanted to exercise their right to vote, especially since a lot of them did not feel that they were doing that. The decision made by the government was a decision they supported. But before we keep going and continuing this conversation, we're trying to make sure that we uphold TrueChat's mission, and that's part of why we sometimes talk about things that aren't in the mainstream media. We try to look at things that either aren't getting enough coverage or aren't getting the right kind of coverage, and this is probably not getting enough coverage. And that's how we uphold TrueChat's mission, which is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. So if you have an ethical concern with today's episode, you can email ethics@truechat.org. If you just want to tell Lance and I what you think, which we certainly invite you to do, we'd like to hear your thoughts at TrueChat.org on Facebook or Twitter at TrueChat.org.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to, I know you're probably not, I don't think you are either. I'm not trying to bash democracies.
No,
but it is an interesting take. I think this is a real, hopefully water cooler. Nobody eats dinner around the dining room table anymore, but a family discussion to be had. What is the future of democracies if autocratic countries have a better style of life, of living than democracies do? What's the future of our democracy? And maybe if you take it one step further, what are things that we should do to keep democracies in the forefront? What do we need to do? And I don't believe, because I can already hear this one guy in my head, that socialism is the answer. I think it's more freedoms and less regulations and more free trade and those kinds of things that we need to do, not protectionist policies and everything else that we're talking about, to get it to that point. I have my own thoughts there as to what we should do. But to me, it's an interesting discussion. What's going to happen to democracies in the near future, in the next 20 years, if they continue to not be economically as well off as other forms of government around the world?
I think one thing that this is always something that we fight, Lance, is the education component, right? When we're trying to address any of these issues, it's always, are we all coming at it with the same information? And I think so often we're not. I really wish our politicians would, because it's not technically wrong to call us a democracy, but we're a representative / direct democracy / federal republic hybrid system, because we're not just a democracy. And I think too often we get caught up in that without really thinking about what it means. It's more accurate to call us a federal republic because we have a division of powers between the federal government and the government of the individual subdivisions, which includes our state and local governments,
right?
Which are all elected either directly or indirectly by the people. Most of the time in our democracy, we have representatives that we directly elect, and then those representatives do the business for us. So definitely not a direct democracy. We're definitely a representative democracy. But again, making sure that people understand that framework is important, because when we're thinking about, how authoritarian do we want to become? How autocratic do we want to become? Some of that is realizing that we already have some of those elements.
Right. They're already there in place.
If you're not a direct democracy, you have those elements. I mean, that's just the reality. Anytime that you let somebody else do business for you, there is a degree of autocracy there. And that's not bad. I mean, it doesn't have to be a big evil thing. The question becomes, instead of us shying away from and saying that we're not authoritarian at all, I mean, there are people who could argue, I'm not saying I'm one of them, and make a great argument that we are a very militaristic, authoritarian government that has asserted its freedom by asserting dominance over the rest of the world. And there's a lot of legitimacy to that argument. So again, it's not...
Well, we also do it inside our country.
Yes.
We have a police force. We have rules and regulations that we have to follow.
Right.
We have laws and things that we have to do as a citizen that we have given the government the power to rule over us. So to say that we are truly free, we never have been.
No.
And that was not my point. My point is, how much more freedom do we give up in order for the said government to protect us or make sure our lives are as good as we would like them to be? And what becomes more important? Being able to work for and I mean not work in the sense of a job, but work for your own happiness and within as free a system as possible, or allowing the government more control over your life so that you have a more stable life to live. You have you maybe don't have as big a house, but you do away with homelessness. You don't have the options to choose the food you want to eat, but you're eating 3 square meals a day. You don't have...
There's trade-offs.
Right. And that's what we're looking at. And that's what I'm saying. How much of that freedom and independence to direct your own life do you want to give up to be able to have a safe environment to live in and 3 square meals a day, even if it's not what you want to eat?
I think part of, Lance, why a lot of people that you've been talking to struggle with having a big problem with this new, for example, this new enhanced license for domestic flights is because, and that's why I'm saying it's so important.
No, they don't have a problem with it.
I know. I'm saying the reason they're
just like, oh, it's okay. What's the deal? What are you so upset about?
The reason they're like that, I think, is because what I'm getting at with sharing the definitions and understanding what kind of government we have and how we've already given up so much is because people don't appreciate how much we've already given up. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have given up some of what we've given up. I'm not saying that we need to go back to, we hang people, for, these 3 or 4 crimes, and for everything else, they don't get any punishment, because it's just, that's how we live. I mean, that's how we used to roll, people. That's what it was. If you were bad enough to be arrested, then chances were that ended with you hanging, I mean, that's, if you're that bad, then, well, we're just going to kill you because we don't have a place for you. So, so I'm not saying that some of those freedoms we shouldn't have given up. All I'm saying is we have to appreciate how much we've truly given up in order to be more cautious about things like the driver's license, like where our standing in the world is, because we don't, I think, fully appreciate how many freedoms we don't have. We talk about ourselves like we're free, but it's all very relative,
And most of us would argue, live a better life now than our forefathers did.
Yes.
When this area where we are broadcasting from was settled. You could be killed by a marauding bear, Indians, a group of other individuals like you who didn't care, didn't have the morals and ethics that you did, because your nearest neighbor might be 3 or 4 miles away and somebody could come through and take everything and take your women and children and do whatever they wanted to. And nobody knew. There was nobody there to protect you. Yep. So our lives now are better off, but we have a police force. We pay taxes for people to protect us. We have this, that, and the other. So we have, as you pointed out, given up freedoms to live this life. Are we going to continue then to give up even more freedoms to keep up with the lifestyles of the autocratic nations, which are slowly overtaking us as far as a standard of living?
Right. And I don't think that the answer is we have to follow them to beat them. They found a way.
Oh, I agree. 100%.
Right. I mean, they ran into a challenge. They saw what happened to somebody like the Soviet Union and generally speaking, 1920s or 30s is when the Soviet Union began, when they overthrew their, their monarch system.
You could say 1917, right?
Okay. Yeah. In that early 1900s.
Right.
And they begin this experiment of the Soviet Union. But by the time the Cold War is in full swing, they have run into the problem that was afforded by what they were trying to do, which was there was a cap to the amount of growth they could see. Because in order to get everybody equal, quote unquote equal, there was only so much leeway you could give business. And that meant that at some point you hit a ceiling and then you got stuck. And by some measures, that's why America won, if there was a winner.
The government kept having to increase the percentage of money available on military goods to keep up with the United States. And so people's standards of living, while being equal to one another, continued to drop.
Because there was no other way.
And finally, to the point where they said, you know what? We don't want this anymore.
Right. We don't like this.
Yes, we're all equal, but we're all starving
right.
at the same rate. And we don't want this anymore. And so they fought for individual freedoms. But then what happened using Soviet Russia is that then all of a sudden they're like, we're not used to competing. I want my 2 loaves of bread every day. And so now we have seen a recurrence of the autocratic government, because these people couldn't deal with the fact that they were dependent totally upon themselves for their well-being and wanted more government control in their life for that stability of a place to live and food to eat.
And some of them have found a way, like China may have found a way around it. We don't know. It's still young in its experimental phase, but it looks like they've found a way around it. And now we have a new hurdle. Mm-hmm. If they found a way around it, what can we appeal to people more with? And we don't have that answer yet necessarily. I mean, that's the challenge that we face. But like so much of what we talk about, I think it all comes back down to knowing that we face that challenge. And I haven't heard
and recognizing
squat about it.
When you say knowing it, recognizing it. And I don't think agreed. Most people don't realize that.
Yep.
Particularly the politicians.
Yeah. You can't solve a problem that you don't know you have. I mean, it's not likely anyway, put it that way.
And that's why we discussed it today.
That's right. So there's a lot of ways peoples can listen, Lance, right?
Peoples can listen?
Peoples.
Yeah, there's lots of ways that peoples can listen.
Peoples can listen.
Uh-huh. I like doing that. Sorry.
No,
I haven't been able to do that in a long time. Yeah, they got Stitcher, they got Spotify, they got Apple Podcasts, and any other place that fine podcasts are found. Them peoples can listen to us anytime they want. We can educate them.
And the peoples can also engage with us on social media. At TrueChat.org, at TrueChat.org.
Well, they can engage with you.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not much on the social media.
We relay
I have my Twitter account, but it's been a long time since I've been on it.
That's true. We got to get that active again.
Yes, we do. I don't know.
All right.
Might get me in trouble.
Please do let us know your thoughts. Hopefully we've given you something new to think about today. Holy crap, right? There's a lot of problems facing us.
It was new to me. Yeah. So I mean, I not that I'm on the cutting edge, but I really enjoyed this, and it has stimulated a lot of thoughts in my mind. So
it's good to know, right?
Hopefully everybody else too. Hopefully they like it, and tell your friends.
That's right.
Because I've gotten 4 or 5 new listeners so far this year. So, you guys got to catch up to me out there, because our listenership has not quadrupled in numbers.
Right. Not yet.
So I must be leading the pack with my 4 or 5 new listeners.
Yes. So for the State of Us on TrueChat in Urbana, I'm Justin T. Weller.
And I'm Lance Jackson.
Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change.